On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Cliff Kim. He's the Director of Insights and Analytics at Fender. We're going to be talking about data and the business value that it actually provides a company. And data is an indicator. Where is data leading you? I think Cliff has a great background in different companies and now Fender in helping navigate companies to answer some of those questions. I'm excited to have him on. Cliff, thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Cool. Excited to have you. Two things I always ask guests to do. One is to let us know what your responsibilities are as the Director of Insights and Analytics. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people have heard about Fender, but just tell us what Fender does in case.
Yeah, let me start with Fender, and then I can break down my piece of the world that Fender does. So Fender is the premier guitar maker in the world. You know, they make Stratocasters, Telecasters, I'm sure you've heard. There are a lot of stuff that on stage. They're great instruments. I was aspiring for one when I was an early guitar player, and I finally got mine in college, saved up for American Telecaster. It's actually that one right behind me. First one I've had. And oh man, they're great. There's just something about them that really kind of elevates your own personal confidence. That being said, there's that portion of the business, but there's another side, Fender Digital, which we're trying to transform and make easy learning of these instruments that are available. So it's for anybody right now, if you go on Fender Play, you can try it 7 days free, no credit card, and you can go in and check out and try to learn a couple songs, trying to learn a couple riffs, scales, anything like that. We try to teach you in a route from start to finish to get you on your way to becoming a lifetime guitar player to have those skills. So that's what Fender does in a nutshell. We teach, we inspire, we create instruments, and we capture all those moments. And for me, what I'm trying to do is find the opportunities in between all that's happening, connecting all the dots with the consumer. Like, who are they? Why are they? And where are they going? And then all the data in between to see like the LTV plus, like the churn rates and all these things. Like, where are the gaps happening? Where are the leaks happening? How can we stop those leaks? And then moving forward is where are the opportunities and where can we push users further? Because I think a lot of times in instant gratification markets, you know, you're going to fall off the chain if you're kind of a long-term play, if we're looking at something very long-term. But, you know, guitar learning is we're trying to throw in a lifetime skill, not an immediate satisfaction, even though there is immediate satisfaction when you get that first chord down. You're like, whoa, I didn't mess that up. But that's kind of what I do in a nutshell. I house the analytics department, and I also house the research department under my umbrella, and we are just trying to solve problems. That's really what we're trying to do.
Awesome, man. When I play the air guitar, Fender's the top choice for me as well.
Nice.
My daughter plays piano, and for the love of me, she's tried to explain it. And she's 8. She's been trying this for a couple of years. I just cannot understand music notes. I don't know what's wrong with me as a person, but I cannot get it. Maybe I'll have to try Fender Play.
Think of it as a science. So
it's a science,
not as art. You know, like just go down science.
There you go. I'm gonna take that away and try to do that at some point in this weekend. So go back again to the topic. I know, you know, just to how we got to this topic. You and I were talking on a pre-call about some of what you've done. And really what came up was data as an indicator, data as business value. Obviously, data is super important to every company. Every company is investing in analytics, data science, everything to learn more about data, which kind of then, you know, sprouts the idea as data helping in revenue generation, finding business opportunities, helping the company navigate into new areas, which is the business value, right? Not just providing support to make decisions for should we do X or Y, but actually what we should be doing forward thinking. I guess as you've been kind of going through your, you know, data career here, and you've seen this at different places, you know, talk to us about, I guess, at a high level, when you're talking strategic use of data and actual, you know, business impacts it's making and kind of what you've been working with.
Yeah, I think people are scared by data. Like, I don't want to alienate all your listeners, but in the current sports world, analytics also, there's like this new regime, right? There's like people that make decisions based on gut and feel, eye test, all that stuff. And there's a regime that's looking at very advanced analytics, like what is your efficiency rating? Like how much are you putting in 36 per minutes and all that stuff? That's kind of happening also in the business world, right? And there are people that are using that as a tool, and there are other people that are afraid whether it's fear or whether it's just this is the way I do things. And I kind of like to equate it into like a simple flow chart of everybody has questions, right? Do you first answer it through reporting and analysis, then make a decision, then go to action? Or do you have a question, make a decision, have action, and then find the reporting? That's the kind of two differences of being a data-driven organization and a non-data-driven organization. Whether you use it to inform a decision or whether you use it to validate an action. Because data is not pure. Well, data itself is pure, but the people that use the data are not pure. So you can turn it any single way you want it to tell the story that you want. But if you use it objectively and see it in context, it can give you a really good indicator of how the market is moving, how your consumers are moving, what people are doing on your website. It can be used as a guide to be pushed forward. And I think that's the kind of revolution of the leaders that are sprouting up now is people that are like, oh, this helps me make more revenue or this helps me give me an indicator. Like it's like a cheat sheet. Like why not use the cheat sheet to help you on the exam? I don't think people perceive it as that. People perceive it as being boxed into decisions because the data is telling you this, but it's actually just, hey man, this is telling you exactly what to do. Just do that and you'll win. Why fight the tidal wave? Just go towards it.
Yeah, it's funny because we were talking about, I guess at some point in everyone's life, they've seen somebody lick their finger and put their finger there to see what direction the wind's blowing. And we were talking about that's a data point. It's
That's
very
data.
crude. That's data. And people, are using that intel to make a decision. And that's obviously trivial. But when we're talking about using data as the indicator and where it's leading you, and then rolling that into the business value being provided by data, I guess a lot of times if you're looking at P&L, that's one thing, but also seeing the opportunities that those indicators are aligning to are the potential revenue sources that you might not be available to.
Yeah, I think, just because I live my life in metaphors and analogies, it's like every single person uses data. Like you just don't realize it. You just don't realize it. If I live in a warm city, so I don't do this as often, but if you live in a cold city, do you check your weather before you go outside, decide what clothes to wear? Or do you just assume, you know what, it'll probably be this. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. Then check the weather later and be like, well, that was the reporting and analysis on that. I think in my time at some of the companies that I've been at, like I was at ESPN and they were looking to acquire a website that had a ton of traffic. And I was like, okay, could be an interesting idea, but we have to look at what we're gaining to be sure this acquisition is worth it. And what I found is when you dedupe the users, we already had 72% of those users at ESPN. So you're acquiring just 28% for the mega million, whatever deal it was. Is that worth the return on investment? Probably not, and they ended up not making that acquisition. And all that kind of stuff, it just really helps you kind of see where you're making the move. Like you got to just ask the questions, look at the data as the supporting data, make the decision and live with the consequences.
Absolutely. And I guess when you're starting to talk about some of this, strategic decisions and obviously the seat of the table when those decisions are being made, a lot of times, data's helping go through that analysis after the fact. And I guess sometimes now it's actually driving that because you're seeing, people in the data science world build the models that are helping identify those trends, those leading indicators to help business make a decision. That seat of the table is becoming important to data. It seems as we keep piling on data, licking your finger, sticking in the air and hoping, the wind direction is being enough is not adequate. And that's why data is getting more complicated and you need these more sophisticated skills coming in. You need, larger scale of processing the data. It's just becoming to a point where it's no longer as reactive a usage of the data as we've seen before.
Yeah, I think the one thing you have to stray away from, the danger of all that, is putting process higher on the hierarchy than purpose. Like you always have to make sure that purpose takes over process. Like you got to make sure that you're answering a business objective or a question. And that's more important than a perfect query or a perfectly clean data set. I've worked at some pretty big companies. Not a lot of places have perfectly pristine, pools of data that you can work from. A lot of places they're dirty. But does it give you the indicator? Does it tell you with a fair amount of confidence that this is the direction things are heading? This is what you should capitalize. This is what your customer is saying to you. And if that's true, then you should move it. And I think what's important is that data itself, it doesn't need to be the data leader, but it could be other executives that follow suit, has to have a seat at the table. Otherwise, you're going to get into positions where decisions are being made without data. And that is scary because that you're not putting the analysis in the hands, or you're not putting the decision in the hands of someone that knows or has an idea of what's happening. You're putting it in their gut, their instinct of what is happening in the market. Sometimes that works. I'm not saying it doesn't work, because there are a lot of smart people out there. There are a lot of people that have the pulse on the market, which also is data, by the way. But having all those data points there for you, the right ones, the ones that help you understand the purpose, that's what helps. That's what really helps.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that 100% makes sense. And I think when you're talking about, putting process above purpose, obviously you want to have, a relevant problem you're solving. Otherwise, elaborate tools and processes don't necessarily produce the end outcome. I think the one thing that's interesting is organizations that trust data. And you were talking about, instinct gut, and organizations that have data as a complementary adjacency to gut decisions are very interesting, because sometimes you have companies that see the data, still trust the gut, which is a different form of processing data, versus companies that are data driven. They trust the data is producing something over a large enough data set to be valuable. I guess you've worked at different places. ESPN, you mentioned, trying to help them understand there's once you dedupe the data, it wasn't as many users. How do you approach that conversation? Like, you got to get the org to trust the data to be able to be data driven, or is it a company decides we're data driven and they do everything to support data?
Ooh, that is a interesting, tough question. I think there is no one size fits all in this. Probably the easiest is if your few senior leaders infect the culture and saying, we're not making decisions without being data driven. I think one of the most interesting and strange, but I guess it works for them, processes is the Amazon meeting method, where you bring in your deck or your piece of 6-page answers, questions. Everyone reads through that the first 10 minutes. And then in the 20 minutes you discuss, because everyone will have all the data, all the information before you kind of have the dialogue of what the critical decisions that are needing to be made. That's, to me, is like really interesting. And that is a culture shift driven from the top all the way down. It's like, this is how we're instituting things. That's one piece. That's the easy way. Another way is showcasing the value of data, which I've done many times in my career. It's a lot of times there are people that say, we are going to be data driven. We're hiring this data person, but then they don't listen, So you have to spend the time to analyze their decisions. And you also have to spend the time proving out the value of what data does in making decisions. And that part is harder, and unfortunately, I think there's more of that than the former. And so for all of the data professionals that are listening to this out there, hold steady, because I truly believe this. Data will always win out because it's constant. It has no political affiliation. There is no sides. It's just what it is, which is the results. You take those results and those learnings, and then you apply it to the next one, And I think when you help people realize and get over the fear of the data, that's when change happens.
And I guess when you're looking at that's actually really fair. And when you're looking at that, and you're looking at companies that think they're data driven, but they really aren't.
Yeah.
I guess if you're listening and you either have an analytics team or you don't have an analytics team, what's the telltale sign of you think you're data driven, but really you're not?
There was an instance where I showed a percentage, like we have like a 66% of users abandoned. And sometimes you have to realize that numbers are arbitrary for every single person. Some people, 66 could be a lot. Some people, 66 could be little. Based on your experience, where you've been, you don't really understand if that's bad or good. So sometimes you have to kind of put it into context and actually say, it's not just 66%. It's actually 45,000 people that are dropping off here. It's like, oh, okay, that's different. Like that score, even in real life context, right? If there's a movie you want to go to and you pitch to your friend with data, hey, on Rotten Tomatoes, it got 63%. Some people will say 63%, that's pretty good. Other people say, oh man, 66%, that's pretty bad. If you get to a point where people will interpret it different ways, you're not framing the story well, and you have to kind of tell the story step by step from beginning to conflict to climax to end, why this data point is important, where your customer is going, and how this will drive more revenue, or what are we learning from this? Because in the example that I pitched, that 66%, no action was taken, but what was taken was when someone had a review and said, the reason why they're dropping off, or like something to that nature, and then alarm bells ring off. To a data person, that's one out of, I think at that point, it was like 50,000 reviews. That's one. That is a blip. That's an outlier. 66% is actually measuring a ton of people, but why does one have such a stronger effect than the other? And sometimes it's just numbers sometimes aren't enough. It's the story that you tell that really helps shape the narrative of the people that are listening. Because for data professionals, you assume everyone is like-minded. Everyone thinks the same, and everyone has the same respect, and data has the same authority, but it doesn't. So if it doesn't, how do you use data as a tool to help formulate that story? Because it is the main character. How do you use that and create the narrative of what is actually happening under and beneath those numbers?
Sometimes you flip on TV, and for those who still flip on TV once in a while. And for some reason, late at night when I'm working, I want to just do nothing. I put on poker. I don't play poker at all, mind you. That's odd,
interesting.
but I put it on, and I just find it interesting to watch the percentages change versus cards, because you see the cards being played, but you don't know what they're thinking. And you're imagining that they're playing percentages out in their heads, and they're playing narratives in their minds of how the hand's going. And they're interpreting this data real time and trying to, like what you said, paint that picture in their mind of how the hand's going, who's in what position, and make decisions based on these subtle data points that they've been trained to pick up. And they're highly analytical people. They know the odds, 66%, and they know the hand they're given. So I think it's very interesting because data has that danger of, you can paint yourself in a corner if you portray data incorrectly, and data can be an absolute advantage if you're able to see through some of that and interpret it correctly. And I think that's where some people, when you talk about, are you data driven or not, I think having the processes is one thing, but actually knowing how you interpret the data as an organization is a big component of this.
Truly. I love that poker example, because one, even with the cards, even if they were face up, there's no guarantee that you would win. You just have a higher probability of a hand that's winning at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then two, a lot of these poker guys make decisions based on a story the opponent is telling. Like, oh, I raised here, I checked here, I bet here. Okay, based on those things, he probably has this, or this. It's like based on that story. And then you get even crazier when you're like, okay, I'm telling this story even though that's not the story of what I actually have. Like, it can always change and move. And that's kind of like the stuff like that we're showing business-wise. And what I said from the very beginning is that, data itself, it might be pure, but in the hands of someone else, it's not. And you can twist it and turn it in any way that you want to say it. Because even that 66% example, if I was telling the story in a way that it's like, okay, it's not a big deal, I could probably craft a story that way. And then the other way, it's, like, oh my gosh, it's a huge deal, puts a lot of onus and pressure on the data professionals to be able to understand purpose, because if you don't understand purpose, you can interpret and create a story that might lead other people in a direction you don't want them to go. So I think that was a fantastic example. and it led me to a different direction, but it is interesting and puts a lot of onus and pressure and responsibility and integrity to the data professionals.
And I think what's really interesting is when you're, kind of piggybacking up what you're saying is when you're looking at some of those, skills that you need, we see a lot of people asking for that storytelling skill. And it's interesting because, being really good with numbers is one thing, being really good at framing those numbers and making sure that you're not biased and you're portraying them correctly. That is, I call that art. I don't think there's a real science behind it. It's a very difficult skill, and it's interpreting the business need and being able to translate that through data so that you're not biasing potentially any of the things in your mind or what directives you have and what you think the business should be doing, because those are all the small nuances to go back to the business value and data as an indicator that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult skill, I would say. Storytelling, of all the data skills, it's not as tangible, It draws the line with like natural ability and learned ability. There is this line there, and I'm still unclear which side of it is, even though I think both things you probably need to be able to have that innate ability and also hone that ability. But it's so hard and it's so critical because you have to be the type of person that can sit in a boardroom and understand and absorb all these things, then translate that to more of your staff, or even if you're doing it by yourself, pulling this information, then repackaging it and pushing it back up the chain. And it's like this game of telephone that you're going back and forth and back and forth. And if you don't have purpose, the business value at the center, you get lost in the shuffle, and it kind of turns into dashboards that are meaningless and are trivial, decks that don't really have impact, maybe a little bit too long, maybe even too short. You really got to always focus and center in on business value.
I love it, man. I've been talking about this with all my guests off there. I haven't really done it yet, but the storytelling skill within analytics, that's going to be maybe one of my first panel podcast episodes. And I'm going to ask you to be on because I think you inspired that.
Hey, so I'll be there. You let me know.
I'm going to put that together. I'm going to get a couple people together. We're going to get that done. Hey, man, I know we keep peeling back the onion. I think this is an awesome topic. I'm going to table the storytelling one for that panel one. And thanks for being on. I want to keep talking, but I'm cognizant of our time. If somebody wants to reach out to you, is LinkedIn a good place? LinkedIn? Okay.
Find me on LinkedIn. Connect with me there. Message me there. I'm not that responsive to salespeople, but I'm pretty responsive to others.
All right. Well, that's good advice for anyone who's listening who does want to reach out to you. Again, thanks for being on. This was an awesome discussion.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, I always ask for two things. One, if you found the podcast useful, share it. We've been growing organically, and it's because people are sharing it. I don't know who and I don't know how, but I thank you. And secondly, if there's a topic you want me to talk about, I'm more than happy to do that. I've been lining up guests for topics based on some of those requests the best I can. Until next time, goodbye.